In this episode, we discover wall art, I inflate a tyre, and Sheila finds more poo.
Some droppings are some droppings, and I think they are.
After the 700-kilometre drive from Broome to Halls Creek, the 150 kilometres to Warman was a relaxed stroll. We set up camp at the Warman Roadhouse before heading into the Bungle Bungles, traditionally known as Purnalulu. These unique rock formations were first laid down over 350 million years ago in the Devonian period, when the most advanced animal was a fish. In an ancient shallow sea, repeated floods laid down sequential layers of sandstone and shale, which remained undisturbed due to the strength of the thick earth crust below. Finally, repeated flooding over the last 30 million years eroded the rock at different levels and at different times, creating the unique rounded stepped erosions that give rise to the beehive appearance of hills that rise straight out of the surrounding flatlands. Not surprisingly, the area is culturally significant for indigenous peoples, and the sheer majesty of the place has to be seen to be believed. Accessing Purnalulu does require a properly off-road capable car, but some of the online advice is wildly variable and just confuses. We read reviews that ranged from impressions it was like a day trip to Brighton through to advising only attempting it in a military half-track. The truth is, you'll probably want a low-range capable car, although we used it only once in our trip. The roads are corrugated, but also very rocky in places, so let your tyres down to 22 psi and you won't have much trouble. There are quite a few water crossings, but the biggest that we crossed was maybe 20 metres and reached a maximum depth of about 18 inches. But the riverbed is solid, so you won't get bogged down. The distance from the highway to the rock formations is about 75 kilometres, so expect to drive a couple of hours in these conditions. So it's straightforward if you have the right kit, but don't bring your Audi Q5 down here. And of course, what goes down must come up. So you'll need a high flow battery driven air compressor to re-inflate your tyres when you've finished. The Warman Roadhouse is isolated and limited, but the staff have tried to present it in the best light. The pitch was outstanding, grassy and with the most beautiful natural fragrance. The amenities were very modern, although they weren't cleaned as often as we might have wanted. Overall, the site scores highly on what the staff can influence. What they could do nothing about is the interesting wealth redistribution scheme that locals appear to run. The custom seems to be that if you don't want to participate, then you signal this by chaining your belongings down. I didn't chain my thongs down. That's flip-flops to our UK audience, just to be clear. And they have now presumably gone to a more needy recipient. Seriously though, on the same night another camper had a car window smashed, although the second night when the site was full there was no issue. I think the advice is just to be aware and security conscious. And then we were on the road again, driving the 300 kilometres to Lake Argyle in the far northeast of the Kimberley. We set up camp at the Lake Argyle Caravan Park, which is situated on the old temporary village set up in 1970 for the construction workers who built the nearby dam. Then we went exploring.
Okay, behind me is the Argyle Homestead Museum. We've arrived at the caravan park, which is only half a kilometre down the road. It's absolutely lovely, and this is the first place that we visited. It houses a little museum, and it's really interesting. The building itself actually started life about 10 kilometres in that direction, and it was the homestead of the original cattle station, but when the Ord River Dam was close to completion and the whole area was zoned to be flooded, they took the building down brick by brick and they rebuilt it here and put a museum inside. Really interesting history in that the original cattle station was started in the early 1880s by a guy called Patrick Durack, who had been an Irish immigrant escaping the Irish famine. And he made some money gold prospecting down in the Victoria goldfields, and then invested that money in cattle ranching in Queensland, and then bought this place and drove 7,000 head of cattle, something like 5,000 kilometres. So it's a fascinating kind of cultural history, a personal story about this man and his family, but there's also lots of really interesting exhibits inside about the cultural interplay between the European settlers and the local Aboriginal communities, and it's very well done and very well worth a visit.
And literally a stone's throw down the road is the Ord River Dam, one of the most efficient dams in the world. 330 metres in length, this dam holds back over 10 cubic kilometres of water. Built in the early 1970s, it has transformed agricultural land in the High Kimberley through irrigation, albeit at the price of large tracts of sunken traditional lands. The turbines are driven by 75,000 litres of water a second, generating enough electricity to power 40,000 homes. It creates a lake with a surface area of 100 to 200 square kilometres depending on the season. The lake is actually a feeder reservoir for Lake Connemara, which is 60 kilometres downstream and acts as the conduit from which farming irrigation waters are ultimately taken. Beyond the Connemara Dam, the Ord River flows another 100 kilometres into the Cambridge Gulf and then into the Timor Sea. The lake is home to a wide array of aquatic life, which we were lucky enough to see on our sunset cruise. And beer o'clock wouldn't be the same without a refreshing dip. Always noting that the captain was on the lookout for any unwanted visitors from the estimated population of 30,000 freshwater crocodiles that live here. And of course, no sunset tour would be complete without a decent sunset.
So today we're visiting the Miramar National Park, which is a very special sacred place to the Mirawong people, who are the local indigenous population. It's known as the mini Bungle Bungles, and we just popped in here really on our way to the Connemara Museum. But actually, I'm so glad that we did. It's absolutely stunning. It's very tranquil. We've just walked up to the lookout, which is a class 4 walk in itself, so a bit of scrambling. You can see the same sort of rock formation with the black and the ochre stripes. So it's the same geological process going on here as in the Bungle Bungles, but on a much smaller scale. Overlooking Connemara, in fact, so if Mark were to turn the camera around, you would actually see the green Connemara River Valley laid out before you, and it's so green, and we can see plantations and crops and palm trees, and it's actually really lovely. We really have taken a shine to Connemara, I must say. But this place, it feels just really, well, it feels special. It's tranquil, it feels like you're very connected to nature here. It's a lot greener than the Bungle Bungles were. I think it's just beautiful. So just a little aside on our way back down from the lookout, we had a lot of positive feedback from our little section on animal droppings, also known as emu poo, and so I've been on the lookout ever since to see something that might, also tickle your fancy. So here, down here, is some droppings, and I think they are wombat droppings because they are cuboid, rectangular in shape. So there you are, more Australian fauna droppings. So one of the things that we really liked about Miramar is that there's a little bit more substance to the paths. They've outlaid very clearly the walks that you can go on and how long they are and so on, which is similar to other national parks. But in this one, there's a little walk. It's very far, 500 metres maybe, but there's lots of plaques under relevant trees that describe what the tree is, its Aboriginal name as well as its Western name, and what the indigenous people would have used it for. So, for example, the kapok tree, used for making string for a belt or for carrying a baby, and the paperbark tree, and another tree which which wild bees would often make. Build a nest, and they could access honey from the tree. It's absolutely fascinating, and it's really rather lovely to read a little bit about how resourceful our indigenous people are. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know any of that.
And the next day we went to El Cuestro to see Emma Gorge.
So here we are. This is a last-minute decision. We weren't planning to come to El Cuestro, but we heard so much about Emma Gorge that we decided we could just about do a day trip from Lake Argyle to Emma Gorge for the day. So we've just got here. It's just 10 o'clock in the morning. It's absolutely beautiful. We chose a good day because it's not quite so hot today. This gorge, so far, we're about 10 minutes in, and it just feels very leafy, very Land of the Giantsy. I don't know how much like a rainforest it is, but it's very green and verdant. So come on, let's go. As we're walking along, we're seeing lots of rocks which have a ripple pattern on them, and the information board at the beginning of the walk says that these ripple patterns were formed by ancient seabeds, inland seas that used to come in and flood this area millions of years ago. And actually there's loads of them. There's one here, there's another one just over there, another one there. They're really beautiful, and it's hard to imagine how they formed given that they're now rock.
And once we'd finished at Emma Gorge, we drove on to Wyndham.
Right, so we are here at a thing called Five Rivers Lookout. We're just outside the small outback town of Wyndham. Population just under 1,000. We've driven 170 kilometres from the campsite at Lake Argyle to come here. We've been via Emma Gorge as well, but this is really quite fascinating that the five rivers that are being talked about here all feed in. We're actually on the banks of the Cambridge Gulf, which is a large inlet from the Gulf of Timor. Behind me here, just in the distance, you can see a body of water. That's called the Gut. And further south, there are three rivers that flow into there. There's the Durack, which is named after the farming family from Argyle Station, the King River and the Pentecost River. So those are three rivers that come up here. Then we've got the old port of Wymondham just down below me there, which is where the meat processing facility was constructed in just after the First World War, 1919-1920. And that was in order for the local cattle farmers to bring their herds up here and for them to be processed before being shipped out. The other two rivers here are, if we swing round, you should behind me just be able to make out the Forest River that comes in from the west into the Gulf, and then further up, I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this, but coming off the Gulf and then skirting along that ridge of high country, those hills across there, and skirting around and then heading another 100 kilometres up there is the mouth of the Ord River, which ultimately is what goes all the way back to Connemara, into Lake Connemara, and then up into Lake Argyle. So we're at the mouth of that whole river system that comes down. So Wymondham here is actually, despite being so small, is kind of central as almost a gateway to the hinterland that we've been exploring behind us. And well, it's interesting historically, but it's also just absolutely beautiful. These flatlands here that are clearly floodplains, and in the wet season that will be completely flooded, and the whole of this area around here will look like an inland sea, and it's really very beautiful.
On the way home, we went via the Ivanhoe crossing, which shows just how wet this rainy season has been. By this time of the year, this cross between a ford and a weir is normally passable to cars, but the millions of litres a minute currently flowing means the crossing remains closed. The locals were happily fishing, which we assumed meant that they understood the behaviour and patterns of the hundreds of saltwater crocodiles that call this stretch of water home. Argyle Caravan Park was an excellent 6-night stop for us. We had a good pitch, although the plots are not the biggest in the world. Like many places, the amenities were tired but functional, with loads of hot water. We've scored full marks for location, given its proximity to the lake, and although the drive into Connemara for provisions and fuel was about 70 kilometres, you're likely to be dotting around the high East Kimberley anyway. There's an infinity pool with an astonishing view over the lake, and a bar and restaurant. But just understand, the menu is limited and honestly not great for vegetarians. But overall, the site scores a decent 4.5 out of 5. And with that, the Western Australian leg of our big lap came to a close. Join us next time as we cross the state line and discover the charms of Darwin.